I'm delighted to join you here virtually to mark World EV Day, and I'm particularly pleased to have the opportunity to talk about such an important topic. Right now, the government is focused on this country's recovery from coronavirus. And at the heart of that work is a guiding principle, not just to build back from this pandemic, but to build back better, and to make this country greener, more prosperous and better connected than ever before. There's no doubt that zero-emission vehicles are going to play an integral part in that future. Every day, there are more zero-emission cars on our roads. In fact, 8,162 battery electric vehicles were registered in July, a threefold increase on last year, bringing the prospect of lower carbon, cleaner air and quieter streets even closer. Other forms of e-mobility, such as e-scooters, offer us a green alternative that could one day help connect communities and provide new possibilities to those with mobility problems. And of course, there is the incredible economic potential too, with investment leading to new high-quality jobs. That's something I see firsthand in my constituency in Redditch. We're part of the West Midlands manufacturing hub, and green technology is creating a bright future here for innovators and manufacturers. I want to see similar success stories replicated around the country. So what are we doing to seize those opportunities that zero-emission vehicles offer us all? First of all, we're investing. Alongside industry, we've committed £1 billion until 2023 to research, develop and commercialise the next generation of low-carbon technologies. And we've committed a further £1 billion to develop the supply chains that will allow us to produce this technology on a large scale. From next year, this package will include funding to attract investment into gigafactories that will focus on building battery technology. On this front, we've also ploughed £274 million into the Faraday Battery Challenge to ensure that the UK builds on its strengths and leads the world in the design, development and manufacture of electric batteries. And as well as funding innovators, we've provided investment to drive the uptake of electric vehicles on our roads. We're offering £2.5 billion in grants to the public to support the purchase of plug-in vehicles, along with funding to support charge point infrastructure at homes, workplaces, on streets and across the wider roads network. And this brings me on to my next point, our focus on building a world-leading electric vehicle infrastructure network. Today, a driver is never more than 25 miles away from a rapid charge point anywhere along England's motorways and major A roads. Within the next 3 years, we aim to have at least 6 high-powered open access charge points at motorway service areas in England. And by 2035, we expect the number to increase to around 6,000. But that's not all. Our grant schemes and the £400 million Charging Infrastructure Investment Fund will see thousands more electric vehicle charge points installed across the UK. We've just doubled the funding available to local authorities to £20 million this financial year, so that we can roll out even more on-street charge points. As well as the right investment and the right infrastructure, we also need the right policies. Just over a year ago, we became the first major economy to legislate to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, a vote that I was very proud to play a part in. We've also just finished consulting on plans to bring forward the end of sales of new petrol and diesel vehicles from 2040 to 2035 or earlier, including hybrids for the first time. And we're launching trials of e-scooters around the country to understand how these vehicles work in the real world alongside other road users, as we seek to establish whether legalising this form of transport is the right option. So I hope I've given you a roundup of some of the steps we're taking in government to harness the opportunities from the zero-emission revolution. But we all have a job to do to boost public awareness about the benefits of these vehicles. There can be no doubt that an event like World EV Day is a brilliant opportunity to send that message. So a big thank you to today's organisers and participants, and I wish you all a very productive and informative discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Rachel. That was Rachel McLean there, the UK's Transport Minister, announcing some exciting policy developments that will underpin the progress on the shift to the electrification of the transport sector. Even this morning, the Department for Transport has announced on World EV Day, and especially for World EV Day, a new tranche of investment and spending, including £9.3 million to encourage businesses to switch to electric vans, and 12 million in funding to propel electric vehicle research projects. So some great uplifting news from UK government. Now it's time to look at what the business community is going to do to deliver on electrification. And I'm delighted to announce an incredible lineup of speakers this morning. We have Melanie Lane, the CEO of NewMotion. We have Isbrand, the Managing Director of BYD Europe. Alison Jones, the Managing Director of Group PSA. And Daniel Bentham, the Managing Director of Ubitricity. All the way through this event this morning, there is the opportunity for the audience to post questions to us, to our speakers. So please do submit your questions via the Zoom chat function. This is a very interactive format. I'll speak to each of the speakers for 5 minutes, and then I'll open up 2 questions from our online audience for a subsequent 5 minutes. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined this morning on World EV Day by one of our founding partners, that's Shell NewMotion, and the CEO of Shell NewMotion, Melanie Lane. Melanie, first of all, very many thanks to you for your engagement, not just with this session this morning, but for your engagement as a founding partner on World EV Day. Thank you very much indeed for that.
No, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Very exciting day.
Thanks, Mel. So this is a day of celebration, so I'd like the narrative for the questions that I ask you and for the whole session to be one of positivity. It's a day, I think, for us to celebrate e-mobility. This year has not been the most celebratory of years, so let's hold that thought in mind. So if you could, in that thought then, give me some opening gambit notes about your vision for NewMotion as a company that's delivering on decarbonisation. What's your sense of that from NewMotion's perspective, and perhaps your own personal perspective?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that. So I don't know how much the audience know about NewMotion. So just a little bit of background. So for those who don't know, NewMotion is a Shell group company, and Shell set itself an ambition to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 or sooner if possible. And as part of that drive have been making investments and changes to the overall portfolio. And so they bought NewMotion in 2017. And I guess our role in the portfolio, if you like, our mission is to kind of collaborate in enabling as people to travel as many kilometers as possible, powered by clean energy. So that's our kind of raison d'etre. That's why we exist, and everything that we do is kind of geared towards that. So we operate now in 35 countries with over 200 partner networks, 165,000 charge points everywhere, and all across those 35 countries in Europe, and over 70,000 people carry one of our tokens or cards that enable them to then, access those networks. So we've been in this industry now for 10 years and feel that we've got a lot to bring to the table in terms of, what we've learned over the course of that journey. Now, I myself have only been here for 5 months now. 3 of those months were stuck in Singapore due to COVID, so I was running the business remotely. And then the last few months I've been based here in Amsterdam. And I guess in those first few months, what I've really been struck by is just how dynamic and fast moving the industry is, even with the COVID impacts. And so clearly e-mobility, is here to stay through the recovery. Clearly the number of EVs and the number of people making that pledge to transition to EV in the future is growing exponentially. So hugely exciting industry to be a part of. And I guess when you asked the question about our vision, so I've explained what our purpose is, our reason for being is. But in terms of our vision, there's probably 2 parts to it. So one is we want to help customers go through their own personal energy transition at home, at work, and on the go. And we recognize that in addition to having kind of hardware and software solutions that enable them to do that, so they need the charge points in the right place, they need the software that enables them to manage their power consumption. They need to know where the charge points are. we also recognise that customers are increasingly going to want access to green, sustainable energy supply. And so that's really where being part of the overall ecosystem of Shell comes in, as that very much fits with Shell's broader aspirations. So helping customers transition, whether at home, at work, or on the go, and then really working forward to help put a power base beneath that of green, sustainable energy.
Thanks very much indeed, Mel, for that opening gambit. Let's move on to the green recovery piece then now. I mean, do you in your as CEO of Shell NewMotion, do you see governments, investors, and board level decision making speeding up in the post-COVID transition to green recovery? Do you see an injection of energy in the sector from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I've been really struck actually just by how much energy there is around the transition, even through COVID. And so we've seen, in fact, if you talk to our head of sales, he would say anything but it slowed down. So the appetite within the business community to accelerate that transition, the incentives and the mandates and even just the dialogue, I guess, at government and boardroom level hasn't dissipated at all, which is really encouraging. I think maybe at the beginning of COVID, people were quite concerned that sustainability agenda might dissipate somewhat, but certainly that hasn't been our experience. And and even in the past few months, announcing partnerships with a range of other OEMs, lease companies, and other business partners, I think just goes to demonstrate that the appetite is growing, if anything, certainly not reducing. Very
good. Encouraging to hear. What's your, lastly, a last question before I go over to questions from the audience. Do you personally see electrification as happening more quickly than many of the analysts predict? Do you see a tipping point? There have been some interesting numbers published over the last few weeks with the take-up of electric vehicles. What's your sense of that trajectory for the take-up of EVs?
Yeah, certainly, and I think our view would be that tipping point is imminent, and what comes with that tipping point is obviously scale. And as you get scale, a lot of the pieces of the kind of the value chain, I think, that need to be in place, become more urgent, but also the incentives are there to make sure it happens. So things like, for example, as we were just talking about before, the access to a broader network. So yes, I mean, it is great that everybody is in the UK is only 25 miles from a fast charger, but if you look at the infrastructure that's needed over the next few years, by 2030, I think the estimate is we need 3 million charge points by 2030, and we've across Europe, and we've only got 185,000 at the moment. So I think that tipping point is coming. But I think with that tipping point comes an urgency around the infrastructure that we need to support that. We know that one of customers' biggest concerns is range anxiety. So in our recent EV driver survey, range anxiety was one of their biggest concerns and continues to be. So that open access, interoperability that was talked about before, I mean, I think remains really at the forefront of our priority. And I think obviously price still remains a concern for customers, so investing in an EV, but as you see more and more models now coming onto the market, I think with the greater degree of consumer choice and different price points, again, that will also accelerate and move us further towards that tipping point as well. So yeah, I think we're really encouraged by what we see at the moment, and the kind of the coming together of government incentives and mandates, kind of consumer demand, and the increasing investment in infrastructure by companies like NewMotion and Shell, I think create the right environment for that tipping point to happen sooner rather than later.
Very good, very encouraging, Mel, very encouraging indeed. So I'll open up to some questions from the online audience now. You mentioned that having Shell behind you is a supporting structure. There's a question from Stephen Wright who asks about that. He says, does having a large utility company like Shell behind NewMotion, is that a huge positive benefit for the injection of energy and frankly investment in your work?
Yeah, it is very much so. I mean, I think the solutions that we need to accelerate the energy transition are going to require, real collaboration across all parts of the energy ecosystem. It's investment into infrastructure, it's scale up of new supply chains, deployment of new technology, new business models, customer propositions. I mean, there's a lot to do. And I think what Shell brings deep expertise in all of those areas. And so what it gives us as an organization, although we're run very much as a separate entity, we kind of have access to that expertise, which, hopefully is the best of both worlds. So, a more agile organization with a really specific mission, but with access to the kind of depth of expertise that Shell can bring as well.
Very good. Another Shell-related question from Neil Wallace, who highlights that you're on the Shell side. Sinead Lynch has suggested that there could be a phase out of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030 in the UK. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we're I know that was just a few weeks ago that she made that statement. So we're very encouraged by that, and very encouraged by the momentum that we see, particularly in the UK, other European markets as well. But those kind of commitments that are made both at government level and by senior infrastructure partners across the country, I think are really encouraging, and will, once those statements are out there, the momentum is there to drive towards them. So yes, we think it's possible, and yes, we're fully supportive of that.
Very good. One final question from our online audience, and there have been a number of questions come in, so I have absolutely no chance of going through them all, but there's another interesting question here from Aaron Anand, who says, how is Shell and Shell NewMotion ensuring that green energy is part of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we very much, as a broader Shell entity, I mean, you would have read, we're very supportive of the Paris Agreement and the need to, for society as a whole to transition. There's obviously no single solution to achieving that. So we are taking a kind of a multi-pronged approach. So we've already invested actually, billions of dollars in a number of low carbon technologies, including, biofuels, hydrogen, wind power, as well as, everything that NewMotion is doing, as well as smart energy charging. So I think in terms of what we're doing, very much investing in those new energy businesses that we see as being fundamental to the energy transition for society as a whole. For NewMotion in particular, as I said right at the beginning, in terms of our aspirations, one is to create the infrastructure that for people to feel really confident making that switch to an EV. But the other is working with Shell so that we can start to supply green energy. So at the moment, if you charge at one of our network charge points, then we assure that the supply of that energy is from a green energy source. And at the moment, we do that by making sure that we get the guidance of origin certificates, which can, which assure the energy that we're purchasing is from a sustainable source. But that's just the start, I think. I mean, the ambition is that through the network of charging infrastructure, we would really want to be able to ensure that, drivers everywhere have got access at home, at work, and on the road to sustainable power.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Mel. You'll hopefully be delighted to hear that I'm a Shell NewMotion customer myself, so I have a very happy experience with the charging infrastructure network. So do please, at the end of this session, I'll invite you to ask questions of your fellow panelists. But thank you very much indeed for now, Mel, and I'll move on now to our second speaker. And I'm delighted to be joined by Isbrand Ho, who is the Managing Director of BYD Europe. Isbrand is joining us from China. So thank you very much indeed, Isbrand, for joining us. There will be questions from the online audience for all of our speakers. So if you have any questions for Isbrand, then please do submit those questions now, and I'll be asking Isbrand some of those questions shortly. So Isbrand, so thank you very much indeed for joining us today on World EV Day, a day of celebration for the electrification of the transport sector. I know BYD is particularly strong in the buses area here in Europe, but please do give us some opening gambit thoughts on BYD and your work. For those of us who don't know about BYD and your work, please do give us a little opening explanation of your work, please.
Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you for your invitation, and happy World EV Day indeed. I'm very pleased to be here, and maybe a quick 2-minute summary of what we do. Well, BYD started our journey 25 years ago as a battery manufacturer. So everything about EV starts from the battery. We started with battery manufacturing. We also are very competent in making our own IGBT, the control system for the EVs, as well as the electric motors. And I think these are the core of a very sustainable EV ecostructure. We have 3 areas that we're focusing on. One is providing transportation, and you mentioned earlier about the buses. We're also very strong in commercial vehicles, the e-trucks. And the third area that we're very strong in is with passenger vehicles. Now, for 6 years consecutively in the Chinese market, we have been ranked #1. That's over 900,000 vehicles. In the commercial vehicles area, including the buses, we have a 7+4 strategy, looking at electrifying all the vehicles that's on the road right now. How do we move it from ICE to zero emission completely? So that's our goal, and we've been doing a fine job thanks to our partnership with a lot of local partners, startups, universities, and whatnot. BYD is a company that started in China 25 years ago. Our European head office is based in Rotterdam. We also have an office here in London as well, very close to Heathrow. We are very proud of the fact that the battery technology that we own are very safe, and this is a sustainable technology that we own. We are manufacturing batteries right now. We're one of the largest battery manufacturers in the world. In Europe, in terms of buses, we have over 1,300 electric buses on the road today. So don't be surprised if you see a double-decker with the BYD logo on it. We have our factories in Hungary, close to Budapest. We also have a factory in Beauvais, which is about 100 kilometers north of Paris. In the UK, we're working in partnership with Alexander Dennis. We work with them to build our buses and other vehicles for the right-hand drive market. And we will be co-developing new technologies together with our partners. So in a nutshell, it's a technology-oriented company, and it's a worldwide company.
The next question is, how is BYD well placed to deliver on sustainable transport, particularly in the lights of the events of this year? You mentioned you work across buses, passenger vehicles, and the trucks side. So can you give us some insights on how you're driving the sustainable transport agenda forwards, please?
Well, I think safety is very important with any electric vehicles. We focus on safety. Safety for the workers, for the transportation companies, and safety to making sure that the vehicles are manufactured in a way that it will create value for the public at large. Second part about safety is, in the beginning of the year, we've converted some of our production line into making masks. We're making masks at the rate of 50 million masks per day. And we're very happy to be able to help our operator friends and also government to making sure that people are safe in general. I think we're well positioned in doing that because we have new battery technologies available online today, something called a Blade battery we are launching this year. And this will create additional safety for the people who are driving our vehicles. So in terms of whether we are able to sustain that, it's very important because when talking about sustaining, it's about the whole ecosystem as well. Batteries as a whole, they do not die. After they have fulfilled their service life, they can be reused again. And therefore, we're proposing to a lot of partners to redeploying the batteries, to creating the zero emission ecosystem. We have the capability to do that, and we are doing that right now with the partners.
Very good. So thank you very much indeed for those answers, Isbrand. I'll move on now to some questions from our online audience, of which there are very many. I'll start with arguably the most famous of all the eMobility influencers in the world, Roger Atkins, who has an absolutely huge following on social media. And he asks that, he says, China seems to have focused on commercial vehicles as a priority. Is that the case? And do you think that other countries should follow that lead as a key tool on decarbonisation and delivering on air quality? What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, hello to Roger. I've known Roger for several years. China has indeed focused on commercial vehicles because commercial vehicles take up 1/3 of the pollution on the road pollution. And if you talk about pollution from passenger vehicles, they're actually much less than commercial vehicles because most of the vehicles today operating on the road, they're either Euro 5 or Euro 6. I think that time has shifted now from commercial vehicles to passenger vehicles, witnessed by our attempt to work with our partner in Norway, doing a trial launch of our EV SUV named after Tang. The Tang is a 100% EV SUV vehicle, 7 passengers, which will be launched later on I think it's going to be Q2 next year. So I think that shift is happening right now from commercial vehicle to also passenger vehicles.
Very good. Good. Thanks so much indeed, Isbrand. So I'll move on to another question from our online audience. There are a huge number of questions for you. I have absolutely no chance of going through all of them, but Maya Girala asks about the importance of innovation in the EV transition, especially when it comes to disruptive startups. I know you've mentioned partnership before, so does BYD work with startups, and what's your sense of that spectrum, that side of things?
We love working with startups. We work with other OEMs as well. We also work with universities. And recently we had a project working with SSE, an energy supplier, on something called V2G. And this is basically using the vehicle battery to balance the grid. Very innovative ideas that we're putting into place with the knowledge of other partners. And I think it's extremely important for us to talk to these innovative partners, and startups is one of them.
Very good. Thank you very much. A final question now then, Isbrand, from another one of our online audience questions. Margot Romer asks about battery recycling. How much can be recycled and replaced in the batteries that you work with?
Well, traditionally on a commercial vehicle, the vehicle lasts between 8 to 10 years. Then the batteries are either pulled out and new batteries are being redeployed. Now the used batteries, so to speak, they don't die. We have a terminology called SOC, state of charge. Most of these batteries will reduce some of their energy capacity, what we call degradation, to about 70%. These batteries can be redeployed as power station. These batteries can be redeployed so that other things can be used for the remaining life of the batteries. Now, we also have a program to disassembling the batteries after the useful service life, so that there will be zero environmental impact. If he wants to know more, go ahead and send me an email. I think it's a little bit more complicated to explain here on this call.
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks very much indeed, Isbrand, for those powerful insights into the world of BYD and your exciting mission to electrify the transport sector. So please do stick around and listen to the other speakers, and do take the opportunity to ask your fellow panelists some questions at the end. So look forward to speaking to you again shortly. I will move on now to our third speaker, and I'm delighted to be joined by Alison Jones, the CEO of Group PSA here in the UK. Before we do start speaking with Alison, another note to our online audience: if you have questions for Alison and our final speaker, Daniel Bentham, the Managing Director of Ubitricity, please do post those questions to us, and I will do my very best to ask those questions to Alison and to Daniel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Alison Jones now, the MD of Group PSA. And whilst Alison is about to join us, I'd like to thank DS, one of the Group PSA companies, for joining World EV Day as a founding partner. So thank you very much indeed to Alison and to DS as well. Alison, delighted that you can join us today. Please do give us a little opening gambit insight into the work of Group PSA and your plans for electrification?
So PSA actually represent, or we are formed of several brands, car and van brands around the world. So you may know us better through our brand names of Peugeot, Citroën, DS Automobiles, as you said, a founding partner, Vauxhall and Opel. We already have electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles, and we've set ourselves a target that by 2035, 50% of all the sales we have will have an emission-free mode through a variety of technologies, so the plug-in hybrids, battery or fuel cell. But also by the end of next year, 100% of what we offer in the vans will have an electric version. So we're well on the way in terms of the products that we offer to our customers. And then obviously we have the broader challenge that we've set ourselves to work towards carbon neutrality as an organisation through our entire supply chain.
Very good. Thanks very much indeed. I mean, I personally see the vans sector as a really exciting vector for decarbonisation. There's a lot of energy in that sector. We've heard the news this morning from the Department for Transport of further investment in that sector. Later today, we'll be talking to DPD, who I know are working at speed to introduce electric vans into their fleet, as are other major companies. So delighted once again that you could join us, particularly so because the French government, it seems, is leading on the green recovery with the president announcing back in May 8 billion euros of investment into electrification. Has that filtered down into your work at Group PSA? Do you see that injection of funding and energy into electrification as transforming your work this year?
Yeah, we've seen it, you see it across Europe in different ways. Quite often the investment comes in terms of consumer offers. So the plug-in car grant are equivalent. And of course, other countries across mainland Europe have invested more in that this year than our government. What we've also seen from a government perspective is, as Rachel said, speaking about investing in the investments to build the batteries, because batteries are a core component, obviously, and we speak about, yes, there's a move towards it, and technically we can do that, so the engineering is in place, but having batteries built in local areas rather than globally will reduce the footprint of actually moving those vehicles around the world. But also, particularly for us, if you think about us in the UK and the tariffs that may be applied if they're imported from outside of the EU, you have a practical consideration. And that's what we're focused on and working with government in terms of how you make these vehicles affordable for customers. Because I think one of the things is we're focused on smaller cars, we're moving up into mid-range cars, but those vehicles need to be affordable. PSA, we believe that mobility offers people access to jobs, to work, to freedom. And you can, yes, work from home as we all are at the moment, but you often need to be able to go out. So, and it needs to be affordable. And that's why some of the technologies such as plug-in hybrids really work for customers who are one car families or one van families, you know, one van businesses, because it gives you that bridge. So Mel spoke about range anxiety. Plug-in hybrids are here now. They're a really strong bridge to get you to fully operating with battery and not worrying about and learning about how you live with a vehicle, how you live with the infrastructure that we've spoken about. And that's what we're focused on, as well as then from PSA globally investing in battery production locally in local regions rather than moving them all around the world.
Very good. Thank you very much. During the events that unfolded this year, air quality became a really key issue and a powerful driver of sustainable shifts at government level and perhaps at consumer level as well. People became, you know, intimately aware of the fact that our cities were becoming a lot cleaner during lockdown. Do you think that air quality piece is helping to drive the green recovery and helping to drive further engagement in electric vehicles?
Yes, I think it is. I think in low emission vehicles for the reasons that I've just spoken about. So one, you've got people driving less, and then when they do drive, they're considering what they are driving. But you also have and you've got the home charging facility. So often if you've got a car that can do 40 miles, so our plug-in hybrids do 40 miles, or vans can do a certain range, and you can use your electricity either at home or your work or on an infrastructure, you can get around most places emission free. And that's what people are really interested in. But of course, to make that affordable, that's adapting, or you've got to develop that technology. We have it within PSA, but it needs to be affordable. And that's where customers then are considering, okay, I really want to do this, but how can I make it affordable? Which is why some of the customer incentives, and I spoke about plug-in car grant, plug-in van grant, are really important whilst we develop that technology and make it more mass produced compared to the ICE vehicles that we've currently got. So affordability is absolutely key for the customers. We see it all of the time.
In her opening thoughts, Melanie Lane from Shell NewMotion thought that we might be on the cusp of a tipping point towards the take-up of electric vehicles. Do you get a sense of that within Group PSA?
I think there's a move, because I think for all the reasons that we've spoken about so far, it'll be driven by customer. It can be accelerated by government incentives or manufacturers finding a way to produce a lower cost vehicle, which obviously we have success with. But you need all of those things to happen. So you've got customers considering, can I live with pure battery? Am I comfortable with the infrastructure? Do I believe that it's going to cost me the same as an ICE vehicle? Yes, because of course, then you've got people who are really strongly supporting of climate, but actually they have a practical household income that they need to consider and how they spend it. So I think there is a move. I don't think it's just a one tipping point, but I think there's a speeding up of it. And then of course, you've got the practicality of how many batteries can you produce. So those things need to come together. And we're fully supportive of that and pushing towards it as fast as we can, but it needs work across all of the sectors, government, the energy providers and the OEMs to be able to actually make it happen.
Yeah, very interesting. I'll add in a further incentive and another variable around the kind of marketing, communications and public understanding piece, and perhaps with initiatives like World EV Day, we're helping in our small way to create what I call the ideas infrastructure that delivers that deeper sense of engagement and understanding of what an electric vehicle is and how it works.
Absolutely, and that's different audiences. You know, if you're fleet or you're a driver of a van and you're a small medium enterprise and van is your livelihood, it's your tool. You have a very different requirement to if you're a family car, you know, and you're going out doing lots of short journeys and then occasional long journeys. So all of this education, it's not, but you know, making it aware, having access to information, and you've seen that definitely ramp up as we've gone through COVID as OEMs and yourself as well. So it is, you can feel a lot of this coming together that makes it feel more normal. And then we're focused on, okay, so what are the practical aspects that need to be in place so that it is easy for a customer, or it is easy for me as a person living my life to make that choice and take away some of those barriers.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Alison. Lots of very interesting insights there. And I'll now open up to our online audience. Our first question from Alex Avila asks about how the EV transition will perhaps impact on the dealer network and the customer experience around purchasing vehicles within the dealership network. What's your sense of that?
I think the network is changing anyway in terms of what customers were expecting. They were before we had a growth in electric and plug-in hybrids and before COVID. So customers want people who know what they're talking about. They can provide them with impartial expert advice and can help them make the decision. So I think that is true of any vehicle. And the fact that our vehicles are available in every powertrain has enabled it to be more accessible to customers to have that conversation without feeling like they're being forced one way or the other. So the retailer network is absolutely about providing that expertise, that confidence then when you've purchased your vehicle, that you have somewhere you can go back to so that you can ask those follow-up questions, maintain your vehicle in the way that you want. But of course, technically, the network has to change because they need technicians who can serve high voltage vehicles and can do that. So there are some practical things, but from a customer perspective, expertise of service and ability to be able to find the vehicle you want is the most important thing, regardless of whether it's electric or ICE.
Yeah, I think you're raising a lot of interesting and important issues around practicality, around cost and real world experiences about being able to afford an electric vehicle. And the next question is in line with that. Aran Prasad asks about that cost piece and specifically about total cost of ownership, and perhaps the need to educate people about that side.
And that's what we talk about. So you're exactly right, because if somebody's looking and they're going on comparison websites and looking purely at a list price, it can put people off. But if you look at the total cost of ownership and the pence per mile of you know, an electric versus a petrol or a diesel engine, you can absolutely look at the total. So then you can say, okay, comparing total cost of ownership, what I want to use my vehicle for, and how often my journeys are of certain lengths, which is another thing, because people think they use their cars and vans in quite a different way to how they actually use them sometimes. And that's where we need to support. And you will see on our websites, there are areas dedicated to that. And we obviously have a lot of independent colleagues and yourselves as well, promoting how you think about it, and often then providing a test drive that is longer than an hour, because you need to live with it. You need to live with your car in winter, summer, your van the same, because we all know, those of us who've preconditioned our cars and have used our apps on our mobile phones, that it becomes normal. You know, there are things, but of course it's quite different. It says it's not a new emerging technology, but for many of the mass customers that we're talking to at the, you know, the 20,000 to 25,000 euro range, it is a new purchase, and we have to remember that it's new for many people, and it is our job to communicate that so that they can clearly understand.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think there's more work we could all do to reframe the conversation around savings rather than cost. Yeah. There's lots of talk about cost and not an enormous amount of talk about savings. So perhaps that's one for us all to consider in our work. A final question now then, for now, a little bit more of a contentious question around the kind of plug-in hybrid versus pure battery electric vehicle question from Charles Key, who asks, does Group PSA have a date in mind to phase out plug-in hybrid electric vehicles to aid the transition to electric vehicles, or not? What's your sense of that?
No, we don't have a phase-out date. And the reason is plug-in hybrids are currently serving a really good job now and are a strong proposition for two reasons. One, we have targets by country for CO2 for automotive. And we are achieving that. And PSA has achieved it every month since the beginning of this year by having a great contribution of plug-in hybrid vehicles. So they are an important contributor to reducing CO2 now, in the moment, whilst we're talking about the initiatives and the expansion of battery production and so on. And the other reason they're really important is they support customers who are concerned maybe about range of a pure electric vehicle, or thinking they drive in a different way to they actually drive. And plug-in hybrids offer a great solution to that. They mean that customers can go to battery, they can drive it in zero emission mode all of the time if they're doing those journeys that they're doing. They can save the battery range. I'm talking about the ones that offer up to about 40 miles, which ours do. So there are ones that do less than that. But when you have a plug-in hybrid that goes up to about 40 miles, that will cover many journeys in zero emission, but give you that backup that if you want to do that long journey from a one car household or one van household, you can do that. And it normalizes it, which then says quite often we're seeing that customers go into a plug-in hybrid and then make the step to electric because they've worked out how to use the infrastructure, they've worked out the cards that Mel spoke about, and it doesn't feel such a leap. So I think it's a really important contributor to reducing CO2 now, this year, not waiting for another couple of years, improving our air quality and supporting our customers in that journey in the way that you've just said about communication.
Alison, thank you very much indeed for now. I do stick around for our final speaker, Daniel Bentham, and then have some questions in mind to ask your fellow panelists when I invite you all to ask questions of each other at the end. So thanks for now. And I'd like to then move on to our final speaker, who I'm absolutely delighted to say is Daniel Bentham, the UK Managing Director of Ubitricity. Ubitricity are the second biggest charging infrastructure company here in the UK. I'm very pleased to announce that Daniel is a founding partner of World EV Day, and today are announcing a major commitment with their free charge campaign to open up their network to free charging on World EV Day. So thank you, Daniel, for being such a great supporter of World EV Day, and thank you very much indeed for joining us as our fourth and final speaker on this EV Summit panel looking at the green recovery. So Daniel, if you perhaps could open up with some words on Ubitricity and what Ubitricity does and how you're helping to transition the shift to electrification.
Absolutely, and thank you, Aid, on this momentous day. Happy World EV Day to you. I'm looking forward to next year already. And it's been great to be part of such a great event so far. As you mentioned, Ubitricity are the largest lamppost charging infrastructure partner in the UK, the second largest public charge point operator. We operate in a number of major cities across the UK, and really what makes Ubitricity different to a lot of the other charging infrastructure partners out there is that we're looking to operate within the existing infrastructure that we have today. So I've been part of this journey now for the last 2 years or so. Started my career in energy systems, new technologies, and what I'm doing here at Ubitricity is making that a reality. And what we're doing is that we are connecting our low-cost lamppost chargers, which can be fitted into the lampposts and bollards and electrical cabinets on the streets, connecting to the existing electricity infrastructure. So there are no additional connection charges. We're not creating those constraints, and we're bringing those charge points to where cars park today. And that has allowed us then to roll out around 2,400 charge points in the last 18 months in the UK. And it means that we are giving people who don't have off-street parking the opportunity to own an EV or lease an EV, park very close to their home, if not right outside their home, and really make a difference to our urban environments where the benefits of EVs will be felt strongest and soonest in terms of carbon reduction, in terms of emissions, and also improving air quality. So, but one thing that people don't really understand about Ubitricity is that our very long company name is not Ubitricity. It's actually Ubitricity Distributed Energy Systems UK Limited. And we see ourselves as forming a part of that smart, flexible, low carbon energy system in the years to come. And what we're doing is that by encouraging customers to plug in and connect the electricity system whenever they're parked, we are then creating an asset for the energy system. And as mentioned earlier on by Isbrand around vehicle to grid, well, actually there's a step before that, which is around smart charging. And if we're able to connect cars to the grid for the 95% of their lifetime that they are actually parked, we can then use those as assets to manage the electricity system, which then allows us then to integrate more renewables. So there is this holistic, joined up approach to low carbon green recovery that we are seeing ourselves being a part of.
Very good. Thanks very much indeed, Daniel, for those opening thoughts and for that insight into Ubitricity and your wider work. So to move on to the focus for the panel discussion today, which is the green recovery. I mean, what's your personal sense and what's the Ubitricity business sense of where we are in this moment in time around excitement, government support, investor support, boardroom support for eMobility? Do you feel like there is a green recovery underway that is benefiting the eMobility sector?
Certainly there's green recovery underway, but it's very much green shoots. I think that's how we should describe it at the moment, green shoots of a green recovery. And the green recovery, in our view, is much wider than just EVs in the transport sector, but EVs are at the epicenter in our view. So there are 3 key areas where we're seeing the green recovery really starting to take hold. Obviously the transport sector now around road transport, rail and aviation as well is now under a great deal of scrutiny about how do we then move to a green and more sustainable way of moving people, moving goods around. On the other hand, we also have the energy sector as well, which is very close to my heart, is then how do we transition to more renewables and how do we integrate more renewables into our electricity system? And then how do we transition our fossil fuel heating, fossil fuel led transport onto green electricity? And underpinning all of this, another area which is seeing a huge amount of investment is the digital services sector. So data is key to all of this going forward and will be the way that we manage our systems in a more efficient way. And at the center of those 3 converging industries at the moment are EVs. So we're seeing that EVs are not only helping us to reduce our carbon emissions from transport, improving our air quality in our urban centres, but by using those EVs as an asset that we can then draw on, we can then integrate more renewables. So plugging in for long periods of time, being able to schedule the charging, People often don't realize that actually 90% of charging events will happen at home, at work, or on the street. And that will also coincide with 95% of a vehicle's lifetime. It remains stationary, parked, unused for its primary purpose. So we must then unlock that as an asset. And by doing that, we're able then to integrate more renewables and consume renewable power when the wind is blowing, when the sun is shining. And in order to manage all of this, we need those smart platforms, those digital systems, to be able to forecast and predict and build out those models, but then to respond to those changing environments and to manage it in a smart way. So I see there's a great deal of optimism because we've seen investment in all those areas. I still think it's very early stage for some of those sectors. I think there's a lot of work to do within the EV space, particularly around the infrastructure. At the moment, people seem to be in a bit of a test and learn stage. We're trying lots of different technologies, AC or DC, slow charges up to rapid charges. What's the mix, what's the blend that any particular society needs? But very quickly we'll need to land on something which means that we can accelerate this from the 8,000 or so new registrations of battery electric vehicles last month to tens of thousands of battery vehicles registered each month, and the millions of vehicles that we need on the road in the years to come. So that's the general view from Ubitricity, and my personal view as well.
Very good. Thank you. I've asked you about a kind of top-down approach from board level, governments, investors around the green recovery. I know Ubitricity has an offer which perhaps democratizes the charging infrastructure network to people who maybe don't have houses that are large enough for off-street charging infrastructure in their homes. So do you see a kind of grassroots, bottom-up green recovery that an organization like Ubitricity can help with those consumers that perhaps can't afford off-street parking, off-street charging infrastructure?
Absolutely. So we do benefit at the moment from a good level of government support. You may have heard of a scheme called the On-Street Residential Charging Scheme, or AUX. That fund has been doubled at least 3 times over the last 24 months or so. It's currently around £20 million of subsidy that's available for local authorities to draw down on to invest in infrastructure for their residents and for visitors to their area. But as I say, it's a start. We need multiples of that going forward in terms of investment to offer charging infrastructure to the millions of homes that don't have off-street parking today and don't have access to those charge points. And in terms of democratization, it's really important this because if we see that roads are democratized and you can see how they're paid for, if you can see that energy systems are democratized and see how they're paid for, we should have a very similar approach to that public infrastructure to EV public infrastructure in our mind. It can't just be for people who have the benefit of off-street parking, large driveways, or people have the benefit where they can go to rapid chargers on a regular basis. We need people who can charge outside their homes at relatively low cost as well. And that's what we need to do, and that's something which we're very proud of, is that by utilizing existing infrastructure and working within those constraints, not having to create those new connections to the electricity grid or have to look at very large civils works, we're deploying charge points at the moment for a very small amount, which then means that we're able to offer a pay-as-you-go tariff to customers, which is just above what you might expect on a residential tariff. There are areas that we still need to work on. From government, we need to look at the tax regime around EV charging. So something which I do talk about quite a lot is VAT. If you're at home and you purchase electricity to charge your car, you're paying 5% VAT. And if you're on the street using an electricity charge point, even though you are a resident in that area and you have the same car, you're paying 20% VAT. So there's conversations that we want to have out there around how do we incentivize and make it socially fair for everybody to own or at least drive an EV.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. I'll open up now then to some questions from our online audience. I think the first one you may have touched on slightly with that VAT question there. So Wesley Delsink asks, and I know Ubitricity is not just a UK company, but a pan-European company, asks, compared to countries like the Netherlands and Germany, why is the take-up of charging infrastructure in the UK relatively small?
Well, there's 2 points there. So for Ubitricity, actually, the largest market is the UK. By far, much larger than Germany, much larger than the Netherlands, and even for France, where I'm also responsible for the rollout there. But in terms of the general look at EV charging infrastructure, I think it's our approach to new technology. We are very much in that test and learn phase where we are looking at different technology providers. We're looking at the market to kind of come up with a solution a little bit in the UK so that we don't have too much of a centralized government involvement in making those decisions before we've actually understood what consumers want. And I think actually in general, that's the right approach for the time being. However, we do need to get to the stage very soon where we make those big decisions around, okay, so we need this proportion of on-street chargers for residents, we need this proportion of home chargers. So for new builds or renovation works, how do we build that into building standards? And then we need this proportion of rapid chargers on our main arterial roads, the motorways, so that people can then use those for range extension or as the charger of last resort, so you don't run out of power. And I think that strategy is now starting to develop. And what needs to come is the firm plan, and then with the firm plan comes the investment decisions from both the public and private sector. And I wouldn't say that necessarily the Netherlands have got it completely right either. I think we will have a different solution for the UK.
Very good. A very simple, practical nuts and bolts question now from Adam Lamalette, who asks about the specifics of charging using a Ubitricity charger. Is the lamppost restricted to only EV and plug-in hybrid vehicles?
Yeah, it is something we get asked about quite often, actually. So we don't. So this is another part of the Ubitricity model, is that we don't own the charge points. They are publicly owned charge points by the local authorities, and so the rules governing the highways and the parking are also in the realm of the public sector. So we do have some local authorities that we work with where they have decided to dedicate those bays for EVs and plug-in hybrids. They tend to be local authorities with very few charge points. And so what they're looking at there is that they want to dedicate that to give the access to also a very small number of EV vehicles, because the EVs are outnumbered by internal combustion engines, and also there are very few charge points in that area. And it works well there as the interim step. We also have local authorities, predominantly in London, where actually they have gone beyond that now, and the density at which they're installing Ubitricity charge points is such that you don't want to dedicate the bays, because actually one thing we've grown to understand for local authorities, it costs quite a lot of money to dedicate a bay in terms of going through the permissions, the public consultations, and then carving out that piece of land for a single use. But also, you don't need to. When you've got a road like Sutherland Avenue near Maida Vale with 24 Ubitricity charge points, every single lamppost has been converted. You don't need to dedicate those bays, because actually 3 parking spaces around that lamppost are within reach. And so you have over 70 charge points effectively on that street. And so Westminster is the local authority there, and they've chosen not to dedicate those bays. So we do work with local authorities to help them with their strategy, but ultimately it's their decision. If they dedicate the bays, great, but we do see that as a bit of an interim step, because when you have millions of vehicles parked on the street wanting to charge, you're not going to then put blue lines around every single parking space for EVs.
Sounds like you have an interesting issue to contend with on that one. A final question then on range awareness and range anxiety. We haven't really touched on that in this session, but Alison asks, he thinks that range anxiety is falling away and that we need to start talking more about range awareness. Is that something that Ubitricity is looking into?
Yes, and it's something which we do think is falling away, actually. People have become very used to thinking that they've got a full tank of fuel, of being around 400 miles, 500 miles or so. But then people, very rarely drive around all the time with a full tank of fuel. It's sort of a third or 25% full quite a lot of the time. So people, when they start to understand that actually the way they drive their cars today, they can't do 500 miles without refueling anyway. When you look at an EV, then you think, well, actually, you could more or less do the same amount of range. And what we do is that we are encouraging customers to then plug in whenever they're parked. That helps them with the range anxiety. It helps them with also using low cost, low carbon power when it's available, because typically charging at home or on the street or at work is cheaper, and you can have those renewable backed tariffs that was spoken about earlier. But also then you're helping the grid as well. You're also available for that smart charging. So I can talk about this from a personal point of view as well. So I drive into London at the moment from outside. It's around a 28-mile round trip, well, not round trip, one way. And that's typically the average distance anybody would be traveling in a day in their car. And you can then recharge from an Ubitricity charge point in around an hour and a half, just under an hour and a half on that. So range anxiety, I think, is falling away, but behavior change is happening. So people are living with EVs. They're understanding that, yes, you may plug in slightly more often, but unless you're going for those very long journeys, you know, beyond the range of your battery in your car, you typically won't have to charge en route. And if you do charge en route, then you're within 25 miles or so of a rapid charger on a motorway to then get you there. So I think it's becoming less of a barrier. What's becoming more of a barrier what we're getting is that having access to a charger where you can charge overnight or during the day is becoming a question. And obviously the renewal of the car stock in the market, how quickly can we get EVs onto the second-hand car market is a barrier at the moment as well. So I think those are two areas that we're very keen on helping to address.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Daniel, for those insights. And I really like your point about the green shoots of a green recovery, work in progress for us all then. So thanks very much indeed to all our panelists. We will now open up the conversation to questions between you on the panel. So the first question is from Alison at Group PSA to Isbrand Ho at BYD. And Alison asks, how can we ensure there are enough batteries available worldwide to produce the EVs in the quantity that we all need on a global level? Isbrand, just to open that question up to you then, what are your thoughts on supply of batteries, please?
How do we assure that enough fossil fuel to last, you know, for the distant future? That would be the same question. We have internal studies that indicated that for the resources that's available today and the speed of deployment of electric vehicles, the closest that will be facing a crisis situation will be 2050 on running out of resources for the material and the minerals required for the batteries. So that is something that I can share with you with the internal study that we have conducted.
Thanks very much indeed, Isbrand. Another question now from Melanie at Shell NewMotion to Alison at Group PSA. Melanie asks, what role can OEMs play in helping drive the infrastructure needed and that we all agree is so badly needed?
We've focused obviously in terms of our physical retailers across the country, making sure that they have the infrastructure and it's available to customers, so that increases the amount of publicly available charging when you're out and about. We also then support at a practical level when we sell a car or a van in terms of home charging. So it's in working with customers to make sure they've got the home charging, because we know, as just said, a lot of that charging is done overnight if you can have a home charger. And so we complement in that way in terms of making sure you've got the infrastructure. And then to support the infrastructure, we offer free subscriptions when we sell those cars as well, so that customers become aware of infrastructure and use it more proactively, maybe than trying to find it themselves. So I think our job is to support both in terms of the practical implementation as well as the awareness.
Thanks very much indeed, Alison. And another question from Melanie now. Daniel, this is a question to you, and it's a question around to what extent price transparency for customers is important. What are your thoughts on that one, please?
So I think it will be increasingly important as the market develops and people are having more options about where to charge. Our view is that you can't get any clearer than just a pence per kilowatt hour rate. and a flat rate at the moment. That allows people then to compare it also with their home. So where if you're going to be charging at home for the majority of time or at work, you want to be able to compare it with that. So anything which moves away from that, perhaps a sort of a minimum charge or plug-in charge or a time-based charge rate, means that you can't actually compare too easily as a consumer and quickly, because they want to be able to compare quickly. So I think it will become important, but I think there are there's work going on in this space from government looking at how do we create that standardized pricing, at least how do you market that to customers, and then there'll be options behind that around subscription models and memberships and all the other ways that you can give added value and benefits to a particular customer segment. But at the very least, for us, a pay-as-you-go tariff, which is kilowatt hour, you can't get any simpler than that.
Yeah, I think there's possibly some, as we're all sending our children back to school, I think there's probably some back to school physics lessons for us all to return to in terms of price per kilowatt hour understanding. It's, you know, not to be overlooked that this is a huge 100-year transition into a whole new energy form that customers need to engage with and to have perhaps better understanding on. So there's that kind of things to look at as well.
It is, but there's a very simple ratio, and it's not entirely accurate, but it's something which we do encourage customers to use, is that 1 kilowatt hour gives you 4 miles. So, you know, you can get it from 1 to 4 quite easily for most people. But it does depend on the car, of course.
Very good. Melanie is extremely active with her questions, so thanks very much indeed, Melanie. It's another question for you, Isbrand, from Melanie at Shell NewMotion. She asks, to what extent do you think consumers care about transferring power back to the grid versus optimizing it better within the home? So a vehicle to grid question there to you, Isbrand, from Melanie.
Well, I think it's a very good question, Melanie. I don't think most of the public at large realize the advantages of doing that at this time being. I think that the public at large need to be educated so that the vehicle to grid advantage being deployed by doing that has to be recognized. And I think that's through education, promotion, marketing that needs to be done. Right now, as it stands, the population of EVs are still too small to have a significant role in the V2G aspect right now. We have been working with public transport operators, universities, as well as the power distribution companies to making sure that it is possible, it's doable, and that benefit can be recognized in the coming months and years.
Very good. Well, thanks so much indeed to our questions from the audience and from those questions between you on the panel. And perhaps one last final single question from me. I mean, if there was one thing that you were looking for in terms of a green recovery and the e-mobility sector, I'll go around the table. What would that one thing you would be looking for? Isbrand, I'll start with you. If there was one thing that perhaps governments or investors could do to speed up the green recovery and investment in the e-mobility sector, what would that be from your perspective?
I think the transparency of the policy, the incentives that's available right now. I think the promotion of electric vehicles, that needs to be done. I mean, witness China, what happened in the last 7-8 years. The subsidy from the government was appalling. When it first started, I think it was 7-8 years ago, it was 50% of the cost of the vehicle. And that really got the motion going in terms of converting to ICE to EV vehicles. We do have policy right now in Europe, in the UK. I think that needs to be more clear, more transparent, and it needs to be spelled out in a more simplistic way to the general public.
Very good. So a kind of hybrid of policy and education there from you. Daniel, what's your sense of the one thing that you would like to see to speed up e-mobility and the green recovery?
So it's quite similar actually to Isbrand's. So we have some very good ambitions set for 2030, 2035, 2050, and we know what's happening this year, but that middle ground is pretty opaque and vague at the moment from government. So what we're really looking for is around some firm policy, some firm regulations, some firm subsidy schemes, some firm targets to be met on that middle ground, and that will then allow business and the public sector to plan for and then start to really force those green shoots upwards. Interesting.
We'll pass all these messages on to Rachel off the back of today's event. Melanie, may I ask you the same question? If there was one thing that you would like to see to speed up the green recovery and the e-mobility sector, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the other guys very much in terms of what they've just highlighted, incentives and transparency. I think I'd build on that by saying partnerships and collaboration. So I've been very struck being in the industry that yeah, the value chain is quite complex. There's lots of different players, there's lots of different business models, and I think as people have reflected on green shoots and a movement is a tipping point, that I think to continue that momentum and to really drive that to that tipping point, we will need across the industry partnerships and collaboration, so that we can give customers what they need in terms of infrastructure. The point's been raised already about the need for education, really helping customers understand what this energy shift looks like. Business models that collectively help us be competitive, and the right regulatory environment. So yeah, for me, I guess it's this partnership and collaboration. I don't think any one entity or any one industry is going to kind of do it on their own, and so we're going to have to be quite open to working together to drive the momentum.
Very good, thank you very much indeed. Alison, a final from you then, that question to you, what's the one thing that you would be looking to really inject that extra layer of energy to really tip the tipping point and along the lines of the green recovery and eMobility?
It builds on what previous speakers have said. It's the certainty for customers. You've seen from today great examples of private companies investing. We have the technology, have the engineering skill, but what happens is customers then aren't sure. So a car or a van for any business or customer is an asset. If they are concerned about what that will be worth, they stall or they don't know where to jump. So having that certainty of investment, of incentives, tax support on clarity over a number of years, not just this year, will really help consumers, us as the population, get behind it and push in terms of being able to deliver this.
Very good. I'm not sure certainty has been an asset that's been fully available this year of all years, but let's hopefully we can look forward to more certainty. There certainly couldn't be much less certainty that we've experienced. So let's hope that comes to pass. Melanie, to your point about the need for partnerships, I hope that World EV Day is an exemplar of delivering on partnerships. And from our perspective, and from my perspective, I think that we're working towards helping deliver the ideas infrastructure. You guys are doing the clever work with the technology infrastructure, vehicle infrastructure, and hopefully with World EV Day and indeed EV Summit panel discussions like this, we're helping to build out that ideas infrastructure piece. Well, I'm delighted that we kicked off today's inaugural World EV Day with such a stellar lineup of speakers talking about eMobility and the green recovery. I thank you all very much indeed, Alison, Mel, Daniel, Isbrand, for joining us this morning. I wish you all a very, very happy World EV Day, and I'm confident that this will be the start of an institution in the calendar year that will really help to energize and drive the transition to the electrification of the mobility sector. So once again, thank you all very, very much indeed for joining us today. I will sign off now and thank the online audience for contributing with such excellent questions, and wish us all a very, very happy inaugural World EV Day. Thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.